Hello, and welcome to week 3 of the online judge class. I'm John Aratinji.
And I'm Stacy Winchell. We are both level 2s from Rochester, Minnesota. And we are here to bring you and enter the judge class. If this is a very similar class to one that I have run in the past. And our goal with this is to bring it to you in a much more easily accessible environment. For those of you that do not have a level 2 or higher in your immediate vicinity to easily gain access to judge information and judge class.
Yeah. So before we move on today, I'd just like to point out a couple of things. If you haven't watched one of our classes live yet, we have a nice little. There's a 3x3 square of little boxes up there, which you can click on. That has 2 different options. We have our showcase, which I believe is a default option, which is displayed for you. That just shows you a list of links which we can post to with anything that we think is relevant during the class. We also have our question and answer, which allows you to ask questions at any time during the class, and we can see those and answer them for you live. So please feel free to take advantage of either of those throughout the class. Ask us any questions you have.
Currently in our showcase, we have up the outline for today, which is going to be, today we're going to be talking about copy effects and keywords. But before we get to today's lesson, we're going to go over our practice test from last week. So, which was up on the page. And all right. So, first question from the review test: what are the card types? Which of those types are considered permanents? So, the primary card types are instant, sorcery, creature, artifact, land, enchantment, artifact, and tribal. For those of you that like to play Tarmogoyf, you probably know these very well, because this is what counts up your Tarmogoyf. Of these types, only 5 are considered permanents. It's land, creature, enchantment, artifact, and planeswalker. Tribal is dependent on what other card it's on, and it in and of itself isn't necessarily a permanent type. Obviously instant and sorcery are not permanents and can't be in play.
Alrighty. So question number 2. So Nigel has 10 goblin tokens in play, all from Empty the Warrens. Amy casts Echoing Truce, targeting one of Nigel's goblins. What happens as Echoing Truce resolves? Empty the Warrens puts 1/1 goblin tokens into play, 1/1 red goblin tokens, and Echoing Truth says, let me just get the exact text. Return target non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name as that permanent to their owner's hands. So Empty the Warrens, since it only says put a 1/1 goblin token, or 2/1, whatever.
2/1 goblin tokens. You have 10 goblin tokens that were all from Empty the Warrens. Yes. That is the end all be all here.
It doesn't give a name for them. So if tokens aren't given a name, it's assumed that their name is the same as their creature type. So in this case, it'll be named Goblin. The creature type is also Goblin, and the power toughness is 1/1. So yes, Echoing Truce will bounce all of the goblins from the Empty the Warrens upon resolution.
All right. Question number 3. What are the statuses a permanent can have, and what are the default statuses of a permanent? So the different statuses for a permanent are tapped or untapped, flipped or unflipped, phased in or phased out, and face up or face down. Now, by default, all permanents come into play untapped, unflipped, phased in, and face up.
Go ahead.
All right. Question number 4. What are the 7 zones commonly used in a normal game of Magic? The zones that you're going to see in a typical game of Magic are the battlefield, the stack, exile zone, the graveyard, the hand, the library, and the command zone. The anti-zone is the 8th and final zone. However, it is not used in any sanctioned format.
And for those of you who are watching us, I just got up the practice test into the chat. If you hadn't already taken a look at that, so you can follow along, or into the showcase. All right, so question number 5: which of the zones are shared zones? Which of the zones are hidden zones? Well, obviously our public zones are anything that any player can normally see. So this is battlefield, graveyard, exile. So our hidden zones are the ones which we can't normally see. So that includes the hand and the library. Now shared zones, those are ones which both you and your opponent can have cards in. So we have the battlefield, very obvious one, and we have exile. We also have the command zone and the anti-zone, but those aren't very common.
And the stack. Can't forget the stack is also a shared zone.
That's right. All right, so question 6. So Armando has a Jace the Mind Sculptor on the battlefield, along with an Oracle of Moldiah. Armando uses Jace's second activate ability. Does Armando need to reveal the cards he draws? Does Armando need to show his opponent the cards he returns to his library?
So the answer to this is, for those of you that are watching with us, part of the link is it has the cards we are talking about at the very bottom of the practice test. So if you want to see exactly, if you're not familiar with some of the cards we're talking about, they are on the practice test as well at the very bottom. So when you are drawing cards and you are forced to reveal the top card of your library with the Oracle, you are required to reveal each card as you draw it. So you will reveal all 3 cards as you are resolving Jace's ability. And you actually technically then also reveal the 4th card that sits there as you're making your decision as to what to put back. On the flip side, and the reason for this is in the rules, all card draws are considered to be individual draws. Even though an effect such as Jace here is telling you to draw 3 cards, what it's really saying is draw a card, draw a card, draw a card. And if you think about it in that way, that helps make it make sense as to why you have to reveal those cards. However, when you put cards back on top of your library, you're putting them both back at once, and you only need to reveal the last card you put back on top, which is the new top card of your library.
All right. All right. So, can a player have multiple graveyards? Can cards in graveyards be rearranged? So, the short answer is no. So a player can't have multiple graveyards. They all have to be one. Can cards in a graveyard be arranged? Generally, no. Now, if you're in a format where graveyard order, where no cards which could matter about graveyard order are legal. So the last time they printed it was
Mercadian Masks block. So if you're playing Modern or Standard, or a block constructed format after Mercadian Masks, then your graveyard order doesn't matter. You are allowed to sort your graveyard however you want. But if you're playing Commander, Legacy, or Vintage, or Pauper, or I can't think of anything else, or block constructed from Masks or before, graveyard order does matter. There are cards that reference it, and so you are required to keep your cards in the order in which they go in there.
All right. So number 8, what is the order objects on the stack resolve? If a player adds multiple objects to the stack at the same time, what order are they put in? If both players add multiple objects to the stack, what order are they put in? So objects on the stack, think of it as a pile. You're going to put things onto the pile, one after each other, and then the top thing off the pile will resolve first, and will go down the stack. So the very last thing on will be the first thing to resolve. Now, if a player has multiple objects which they're putting on the stack at the same time, say they have 2 at the beginning of the upkeep triggers, then that player gets to choose the order in which they're going to put those on the stack. Now, if they have 1 beginning of upkeep trigger and their opponent has 1 beginning of the upkeep trigger, those players will put them on the stack in active player, non-active player order. So the active player will put theirs on the stack, and then if it's multiplayer, you'll go around the table, and each player in turn order will put their abilities on the stack. And if a single player has multiple abilities to put on the stack, they'll choose what order to put those on in their specific slot in the order.
All right. Speaking of the stack, question number 9 is, what are the 3 things that do not use the stack? The first of which is special actions do not use the stack. These actions are playing your land for a turn, suspending a card if you have a card with suspend, like Ancestral Visions, turning a morph creature or a megamorph creature face up, like if you're flipping up your Den Protector, paying a cost to end an effect or take an action, such as Leonin Arbiter is a good example here. It is a primary example of it. It is not an activated ability to allow yourself to search your library. You are ending a special effect, and that action does not use the stack. The other abilities, paying a cost to nullify an effect from a delayed trigger. A delayed trigger is something set up by Quenchable Fire or Glass Asp. It tells you unless you pay a certain amount of mana before a certain time, it's going to create an effect. And paying to prevent that effect is also another special action that does not use the stack. And then the last ability that doesn't use the stack is mana abilities and turn-based actions. Turn-based actions we covered when we were talking about turn structure in the first week of the class. And then mana abilities are any ability that makes mana, and it does not use the stack.
Yes. So number 10, are exiled cards still considered to be inside the game? Are exiled cards face up or face down by default? So exiled cards are still considered to be inside the game. This can be a little confusing because a while back they changed it from the text removed from game to specifically exiling,
which I believe happened from, I believe it was the set Alara Reborn is where they made that templating shift. And before that, they were considered to be removed from the game, so they were not considered to be in the game for cards like Burning, or any of the Wishes, or anything that looked for cards outside the game. But now exiled cards, they have their own zone. They are still in the game, even though they're in a very hard to reach location.
Exiled cards are face up by default. There are some abilities which can put them face down,
but by default they are face up.
Yep. Number 11, a player is on the play and it is the first turn of the game. Walk through and describe what happens for each of the steps of the beginning phase for that player.
All right. So there is an untap step where nothing happens because you don't have any permanents, followed by an upkeep where there shouldn't be anything happening during the upkeep, where nothing happens, though is actually a couple exceptions to that. And then on the first player's first turn of the game, they skip their draw step. And this is a very special thing because they are the first player in a 2-player game.
Number 12, a player is attacking with a bear cub, which is blocked by a walking corpse, a grizzly bears, and a traveling philosopher. What is the very first action the bear club player must take after blockers have been declared? So in this instance, the cards aren't relevant. They're just all vanilla creatures.
They're all blank 2/2s with some text, with no text. Sorry, with no text. They are 2/2s.
After any blockers are declared, first the active player, then the non-active player will declare the damage assignment order for any creatures which are blocked by 1 or more creatures or are blocking 2 or more creatures or are blocking 2 or more creatures. So the active player will go first. He will decide the order in which he will deal damage to those creatures. We're not dealing the damage yet. That'll be taken care of in the combat damage step, but just you will go in this order, assigning lethal damage.
All right, and number 13, last question for this review test. Which steps can repeat in a turn? So the combat damage and cleanup steps can repeat. The combat damage step repeats if you have any creatures that have first strike or double strike. And cleanup can be repeated if anything happens during cleanup which causes an ability to trigger or players to receive priority. The cleanup is then repeated in order to make sure that we're going through a cleanup step where none of those things happen.
Alrighty. So are there any questions about any of those problems or anything from last week in general? Again, there's the Q&A app up there for all of those who aren't in the video chat. It just lets you post a question and we can see it.
All right. Doesn't look like there's anything currently, so give it a second while we a second. All right. Well, I don't see any questions, so we will, for now, we will move on to this week's lesson, which is copy effects and keywords. So, copy effects. So, John has put the link in the showcase for the outline for this week. And the very first section of it is copy effects. Now, if you look at the very beginning of that section, there is a very large blob, which is all of the technical rules behind copy effects. And when I teach copy effects, I really try and simplify it, because copy effects break down into two kinds of copy effects. You're either copying a permanent or you're copying a spell. So we're going to talk about, first, we're going to talk about copying a permanent. You know, this is things like clone, progenitor mimic, Phyrexian metamorph, anything that says, you know, as this comes into play, it comes into play as a copy of something else. And the important thing to remember with any copy effects, whenever you copy something, you are going to get the base characteristics of the card without any modifications to it whatsoever, with the exception of other copy effects, which I will talk about in a minute. So, you know, if I cast a clone and let's say my opponent has an activated Mutavault. It is currently activated. It is a 2/2 creature that it's a land. Taps for colorless, taps in 1 mana to activate it. If I cast a clone and I copy this Mutavault, I get the base characteristics of the Mutavault. So I have a land that is not currently a creature, and I can pay 1 mana to activate it. I can tap it for mana because it's not a creature, so it's not affected by summoning sickness currently. And that is one of the better ways to describe copy effects. Any copy effect is base characteristics of the card. Now, there is that caveat. Now, the exception to that is if there are any other copy effects, you're also copying that. So let's say instead of clone, I decided I'm using Phyrexian metamorph to copy my Mutavault. Well, Phyrexian metamorph, as part of its copy effect, says in addition to copying it, it's also still an artifact. So whatever you're copying is an artifact in addition to its other types. So now I have a Mutavault base card. It's just a land that is also an artifact. So it's an artifact land. Now, let's say I decide then I'm going to cast my clone and I choose to copy my Phyrexian metamorph copy. Well, I copy the copy effect and I copy the base characteristics of the card being copied. So now I have 2 artifact lands, neither of which is activated unless I've activated them for some reason. And that's really all you have to remember on copying a permanent is you get the base characteristics of the card plus copy effects. So next part is the other half of the copying things is copying spells. Now, everything I said about copying permanents basically does not apply to copying spells. Whenever you copy a spell, or you have an ability that says cast a copy of the spell, you are copying whatever is on the stack. So let's say you have Twin Cast or Fork, and let's use Twin Cast because it's simpler. If you cast Twin Cast targeting a spell, let's say Your opponent has cast Cryptic Command. They're trying to bounce one of your lands and draw a card. And you decide, well, I don't really want that to happen, so I'm going to copy your Cryptic Command. Well, you don't get to choose different options for the spell. Most copy effects say that you get to choose new targets, but whenever you copy a spell, the base rules don't let you change targets. But every copy effect I can think of lets you change the target for a spell. But the copy of Cryptic Command you get will say, return target permanent to its owner's hand, draw a card. So you can't change it to say counter target spell, tap your team. You get bounce a permanent, and draw a card. Also, as part of copying spells, it also knows any choices you made, as well as how much mana you spent for said spell. Not how much mana, sorry. It knows any values for X that may or may not exist for the spell. So let's say I twin cast a fireball. It's going to know exactly how much mana was spent on that fireball. So it will, if I'm twin casting a fireball for 6, I will also get a fireball for 6. And really, that's what covers copying a spell. Copying a spell is whatever that spell is at the moment you copy it. Copying a permanent is base characteristics of the card.
How about if I twin cast Radiant Flames?
So Radiant Flames is special. So Radiant Flames says when this spell resolves, or Radiant Flames says it checks the amount of mana spent on the spell. Now, Radiant Flames itself, obviously you probably paid some mana for that spell. You're going to deal however much damage based on the mana you spent. Now, when you twin cast a spell with Converge, you didn't actually pay any mana into the copy. You paid mana into twin cast, but you didn't pay mana into the copy. The copy is going to see that no mana was spent and will not deal any damage in that case. Like I said, the whole section it is a lot of text, and it's very, very detailed to cover all the things, because honestly, copying things is rather complicated. But those rules that I just gave you will cover 99% of your circumstances for copy effects. So if there are any questions on that, feel free to ask. But for now, I think it's time to move on to abilities, because we have a lot of keyword abilities to go over. So the first part of which is evergreen keywords.
Are we gonna go over the standard?
What time? How much
We're
time
at
do we have?
7.
We probably have time. Well, I think we'll be able to get through it all. So.
We're probably going to have a slight bonus today. I know this was originally advertised as copy effects plus evergreen keywords, but we are probably going to have time, and we'll just go ahead and also go over the standard keyword abilities as well. Just get that out of the way, so you know the class is 1 week shorter.
And the last time I ran this class, we the Nita and I, the judge that I ran it with, we did do all the keywords in 1 week. But that online doesn't help us, because that was back in Return to Ravnica, and let's there's no you don't need to know what detain means in standard right now. So that outline did not help us for this week.
Yeah.
Welcome to beta.
If you're like in extended, I mean, there's something
for all those detain cards that sees playing in modern right now.
Yeah. Yep.
So
definitely.
All right.
So evergreen keywords. We'll just go through the list. So Death Touch. This is a static ability on creatures, or well, currently only creatures. They could put it on non-creature things.
It can go on non-creature things because of tribal things, but
it does.
It hardly ever comes. Don't worry about it.
But Death Touch. So basically, it says any non-zero amount of damage. So any amount of damage, combat damage, I should say.
Damage.
No, yeah.
It's actually misprinted on our outline, but it is any amount of damage.
This creature deals is lethal damage. So normally you have to deal damage equal to a creature's toughness. In this case, you just need to deal 1 damage with Death Touch. This can be via combat, or it can be via You know, a Warstorm Surge, I believe, has the whenever a
Surge.
creature enters the battlefield, that creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player.
Fight is probably the best example, which we'll get to later because fight is also a keyword ability.
So literally any damage dealt by this creature will kill things. Defender.
Defender is pretty easy. It's a static ability. It just says creatures with Defender cannot attack.
Double Strike. So Double Strike means this creature will deal damage both in the first strike and the normal combat damage steps. So it'll get to deal this damage twice, both when creatures are dealing first strike and at the normal time.
In our outline here, there's a lot of text in this because it's explaining how you go through having the 2 combat damage steps. And if for some reason you lose Double Strike between having first strike damage dealt and normal damage being dealt, the game, when it goes to deal normal combat damage, looks and is like, hey, do you have Double Strike, or have you not dealt your combat damage yet? And if the answer is you don't have Double Strike and you have dealt your combat damage already, you don't get to deal normal damage.
Yeah. And we went over that in week 1 with the turn structure.
But for the most part, Double Strike just says you get to deal damage during the first strike combat damage step and the normal combat damage step.
Yeah.
All right, Enchant. So Enchant is a static ability that's written as enchant something, permanent or player. Actually, I can't even say permanent or player because there are a few weird ones where you can enchant things that aren't permanents or players, but it's enchant something. The enchant ability restricts what your aura can enchant. If for some reason your aura has multiple instances of enchant, all of them apply. So you have to meet all of the requirements of your enchant in order to enchant the thing that you want to enchant. And that's a lot of saying the word enchant.
Yes.
Let's see. Any auras that can enchant a player can target and be attached to players. Such auras currently can't also enchant permanents. They would only enchant players. Basically, it's the important part of that is it'll say enchant something. Whatever your aura is has to be attached to that something that it says on the card.
All right. So Equip. Equip is our first activated ability. It is written in Equip, then a cost, which means pay the cost and then attach this equipment to a target creature you control. It has to be a creature you control. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. So it's sorcery speed, and if an equipment has multiple instances of equip, any of this equip abilities may be used.
This is probably most relevant for the card Pure Steel Paladin, which just says all of your equipment have equip 0.
Yes. So if you really want to pay mana for some reason, you can use a normal equip, or you can use the equip 0. All right.
All right. Fight. When 2 creatures fight, they deal damage equal to their power to each other simultaneously. If one of those creatures no longer exists when the fight would happen, or if the fight spell or ability is targeted and one of the targets illegal, no fight happens. Now, normally, when you have a spell or ability, the generic rule with the spell or ability is the spell does what it can. Fight is the exception to the rule. For a fight to happen, both creatures need to still be legal targets. Both creatures need to still be there in order to have that fight actually happen. If any of that isn't true, no fight happens. Fight is not combat damage because you're not actually in combat. So any abilities that modify combat, like First Strike or Flying, do not apply. But any abilities that just modify damage definitely do apply. So Death Touch we mentioned earlier, Lifelink and Infect. I guess we're not going to get to Infect today because it's not in Standard, but Lifelink also definitely counts when you fight.
Yes. First Strike. So First Strike, we kind of already went over this with Double Strike, but if you have First Strike, there is a second combat damage step before the normal combat damage step. Creatures with First Strike will deal damage then. And again, if a creature loses first strike after they've already dealt combat damage in the first combat damage step, they will not deal damage in the second combat damage step.
Also, I've seen it come up if for some reason your creature gains first strike during the first strike combat damage step, and hasn't dealt its combat damage yet, it still gets to deal its combat damage during the normal damage step. You don't miss out because you gained first strike at a weird time.
Yeah, and if you want more details on that, again, our week 1 class covered that in more detail.
All right, Flash. Flash is pretty self-explanatory. It's a static ability, functions in any zone from which you could play a card, and Flash just means you can play this card anytime you can cast an instant. Pretty self-explanatory, and in a lot of a lot of sets, it still has the reminder text on it, so that's pretty easy. Next ability is Haste. Haste is another static ability. If a creature has haste, it can attack even if it hasn't been controlled by its controller continuously since his or her most recent turn began. That is a lot of words to say. Creatures with haste don't have summoning sickness, which means you can activate its activated abilities and you can attack with it the turn that you gain control of it or play it.
So the next one is Hexproof. So Hexproof just means it can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. One interesting question I got about this with our current things in Standard. So my opponent Emrakul me. Can he target my Hexproof thing? When they're controlling you, your spells are still controlled by you.
Even though they're controlling you.
Yes.
Interesting thing.
So other interesting thing to know with Hexproof is that Hexproof is kind of the child of Shroud. For those of you watching that have played Magic for a long time and remember Shroud. Shroud said this can't be targeted by anybody. Hexproof just says my opponents can't target it, but I can still target it,
yes.
And I can most certainly target it if somebody's controlling me.
Yes. Indestructible. So indestructible means a creature cannot be killed through lethal damage or through destroy effects. They still can be killed if their toughness becomes 0 or less. They also can be exiled. And sacrificed. So it just protects it from lethal damage and destroy effects. It doesn't protect it from anything else, really.
True. Next is Lifelink. Lifelink is a static ability. It modifies how the creature dealing damage interacts with your life total. Damage dealt by a source with Lifelink causes that source's controller or its owner, if it has no controller, to gain that much life, in addition to any other results that damage causes. If a permanent leaves the battlefield before an effect would cause it to deal damage, you use its last known information to determine whether it had Lifelink. That's not terribly relevant anymore because combat damage doesn't use the stack anymore. The lifelink rule does function no matter what zone an object with lifelink deals damage from. So if you're cycling your goblin, I can't think of the name of the guy. If you are cycling your goblin with cycle,
Jump Home
Incinerator. Thank you. If you're cycling your Jump Home Incinerator and somehow all goblin cards you own have lifelink, you get to gain life even from that.
And one thing which should be noted, lifelink is just a instantaneous effect. It is part of the effect of dealing damage, so it will happen right away. It's not a triggered ability, so you can, be dealt what would be lethal damage, but have a lifelink dude, block something else and survive, because the lifelink and the damage will happen simultaneously. So if your end life total ends up positive, you won't die from that.
Yes.
And
lifelink, as a caveat to that, doesn't use the stack. It just happens.
Yep.
All right, Menace. So Menace is a brand new one. We just got introduced to this in Magic Origins. Menace is an evasion ability. A creature with Menace can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. That's pretty simple. There's been that line of text where this creature can't be blocked by 2 or more creatures for many years. They just finally decided to keyword it within the last year.
Prowess. A creature with prowess has, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn.
This started as a normal as a block ability because this was introduced to us in Khans of Tarkir, and Wizards R&D loved it so much that they kept it. And it is now an ability you will see regularly. They have told us this. Next ability is Reach. Reach is a static ability. Did we say flying? Oh my god, they did not have flying on this. Oh no, we had flying. I just skipped right by. This is my fault.
Yeah.
Welcome to beta, everybody. So we're gonna talk about flying quick, and then we'll go back down and talk about Reach.
Seems like a good plan.
So flying's an evasion ability. A creature with flying can't be blocked except by creatures with flying and or reach. A creature with flying can block any creature with or without flying, unless an ability says otherwise. So then, going down to Reach, Reach is just a static ability. A creature with flying, obviously we said with flying, a creature with flying can't be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach. All Reach lets you do, you are not flying, but you can block fires. That's all Reach does for you.
So the next ability is Scry. So Scry is a keyword action. It means it'll be in the format Scry and then a number. So Scry X means look at the top X cards of your library. Choose any number of them to put on top in any order, then put the rest on the bottom of your library.
In any order.
Yes, in any order. And this wasn't keywords. They made it keyword also relatively.
I mean, it's an old ability. Yes. It's existed since 5th Dawn, but after they've brought it back a couple of times, and then they realized that I think it was during Theros Block one, because it was in all of Theros Block. They realized that it gave them a way to smooth out people's draws without actually letting them just draw extra cards, and they were very happy with it, so they decided to just make it an evergreen keyword, and I think everybody's pretty much happy with that.
Of course, this is going to stick around as an evergreen keyword because of the Vancouver Mulligan, where if you start with less than 7 cards, you get to scry one before your first turn.
All right, now we get to the block of text, which is Trample. Trample's super complicated. There was a time in Magic's history where they tried to get rid of Trample because it's super complicated, but players didn't like it, the things they tried to put in for it, and so Trample's still here. So Trample is a static ability that modifies rules for assigning and attacking creatures combat damage. The ability has no effect when a creature with Trample is blocking or is dealing non-combat damage, such as with a fight. So the controller of an attacking creature with Trample first has to assign damage to the creatures blocking it. So let's say I have a Primeval Titan. We're going to ignore its triggered abilities. We're just going to assume that we've dealt with those already, and we're just talking about it dealing damage. It is a 6/6 Trample. And my opponent, John, here, he has a Grizzly Bear that he has thrown in front of my Primeval Titan. So what Trample lets me do is first I have to assign damage to his blocker. I have to assign lethal damage to it, 2 damage. But any remaining damage I can then assign to him as the defending player. When you're checking for assigned lethal damage, you do get to take into account any damage already marked on the creature this turn. So let's say John's Grizzly Bear has a point of damage on it from something. I decided to hit it for 1 with part of my Electrolyze. Well, now I only have to deal 1 more damage to it in order to make it lethal damage, and so then I could, in this case, assign 5 damage to him with my Trample damage. Let's see. Damage from the creature. Just making sure I'm not forgetting anything here. So,
well, there, so let's say my Grizzly Bear hasn't taken any damage this turn. He gives his Primeval Titan Death Touch.
As we discussed earlier, Death Touch makes any amount of damage lethal. So now I only have to assign 1 damage to his Grizzly Bear, and the other 5 I can go to him, even though it's a 2 toughness creature. I've already assigned it lethal damage.
I mean, it could be an Emrakul. It doesn't matter. 1 damage is lethal. Now, if I had a indestructible creature, like Ulamog, Death Touch will still go over. Well, let's make it a smaller indestructible, like a 3/3 indestructible creature.
They exist.
But Death Touch would still mean I would only have to assign 1 damage. It's the damage that would destroy a normal creature. We can't help that indestructible will prevent it from being destroyed. And if I didn't have Death Touch, I would only need to assign 3 damage. The remaining 3 would trample over.
Let's say I have the Emrakul, because Emrakul has trample. Let's just keep using Emrakul.
Sure.
I have the Emrakul, the Promised End, and John has he has somehow given his Ulamog flying.
Yes.
So he blocks. Even though I can't kill his Ulamog because it's indestructible, I still have to deal the 10 damage to it normally. Now, if my Emrakul somehow has Death Touch, I then only have to deal 1 damage to it. This is also true of anything that has a protection effect on it. So let's new example, because Emrakul and all that is big. Let's say I have a 3/3 red creature with trample, and John has a core Firewalker, which is a 2/2 with protection from red. I still have to attempt to deal 2 damage to his creature, even though it won't take that damage, and only 1 damage can get over to him. And then there's still more fun with trample, because all the other abilities are relatively self-explanatory. It's when anything interacts with, when you have trample plus other abilities, life just gets complicated. So the last thing on trample is trample plus double strike. So let's say I have an Emrakul that somehow has double strike.
That's correct.
And he blocks with his Ulamog.
With flying.
With flying, because that's we're judges. We want legal blocks. So I have to deal now during my double strike, my first combat damage step. I have to deal 10 damage to his Emrakul, or to his Ulamog, because it doesn't have any damage on it. But then when I go to deal my normal damage, I look at Emrakul, or I look at Ulamog, and it's like, whoa, you already have lethal damage on you. I don't know why you're still here, but I don't have to deal you any more damage. Now, let's instead say, let's get rid of Ulamog. Let's have let's instead say, instead of being indestructible, let's say he had protection from colorless. So now, during my first strike damage step with my double strike, I have to try and deal you 10 damage, even though it won't do anything. And I get to trample for 3. Then I go to deal my normal damage. Well, I look at you and you're like, well, I don't have any damage on me. You have to hit me for 10 again, or at least try.
Yeah.
And that, so I try and deal 10 again, so then I only get to trample for 6 with my 13 power double striking trample. That covers all of the weird interactions with trample, which I normally don't, like, we normally don't do, like, the really weird stuff, but anytime trample is with something else, it just gets complicated, so I like to cover it.
And should just quickly mention that this can be figured out by the rest of the trample stuff, but I get questions every now and then. If for some reason your trampler is blocked by something, and then the thing it was blocked by disappears, you are still going to assign all of your trample damage to the player or planeswalker you were attacking.
You attempt to deal lethal damage to blockers. There aren't any there, so you just get to go right to your opponent's face. The other important thing with trample is trample does not let you trample over if you attack the opposing player's planeswalker. When you attack a planeswalker, you are attacking that planeswalker, and you can trample over. So let's say I have my 6/6 trample. Yes. The question we got was banding. There are like 3 people in all of Magic that know how banding works. And I will address the banding issue separately, because it's not in standard. But back to my planeswalker example. So let's say I have my 6/6 trample and John blocks with his grizzly bear. I get to trample for 4 over to the planeswalker. Now let's say that planeswalker only had 3 loyalty left. I have 1 damage left, but I can't trample from the planeswalker to the planeswalker's controller because I attacked the planeswalker specifically.
Yeah. And our final Evergreen ability, which we need to go over, is Vigilance. This is pretty simple stack ability. It modifies the rules for the declare attacker step. So normally we're required to tap our creatures when we attack with them. Vigilance just says we don't need to do that. We don't need to attack with any creatures with Vigilance.
To be fair to the question that I'm getting, like you could probably spend an entire hour talking in a class talking about just banding on its own. This is one of the reasons why Wizards has, despite many people who want to see banding reprinted, Wizards has said they will not reprint banding because it's complicated.
All right, that was
all the evergreen keywords. So next we're going to go over keywords in standard.
That was about 20 minutes or so.
The keywords, like trample, is actually more complicated than all of these any of these keywords we're about to go over.
That's fair.
So I think we can knock. We started a little late too, so we can knock this out.
All right, let's breeze through it.
All right. So bolster. Bolster is in the form of a bolster number, and when you bolster, you when it resolves, you find the creature or creatures with the lowest toughness. Pick one of those creatures, and then you put the number of counters on it that was said by your bolster number. So if it says bolster 2, you'll put 2 +1/+1 counters on the creature that you with the least tough, one of the creatures with the least toughness. Next up is rebound. Rebound is a triggered ability. No, not a triggered ability.
It's a replacement.
It is a replacement effect. It replaces going to the graveyard. If you cast this spell from your hand, instead of going to the graveyard, you exile it as it resolves. And then at the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost.
So it's a replacement effect that creates a delayed triggered ability. And we'll go over what both of those are in much more detail in later classes.
But the short version on rebound is cast it now, get it again later.
Yep, at the beginning of the next upkeep. You don't have to pay the cost, and yes, sorceries can be cast at that next upkeep.
Because the game rules tell you so, or
yes.
the card tells you so. Next up is exploit. So exploit is a triggered ability that says when this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. And then all creatures that have exploit say specifically when this creature exploits a creature, do something. The two important things to note is the creature with exploit has to be in play if you want to get your exploit trigger off of it when you sacrifice a creature. Exploit is a may, so if for some reason you don't want to exploit, you most certainly do not have to. But your creature with exploit has to be in play when you exploit in order to get the trigger. However, because of how the game works, you can sacrifice the creature with exploit to get your exploit trigger. You most certainly can sacrifice, like the card I'm looking at is Silumgar Butcher, which says when it exploits a creature, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. And it can exploit itself to then target another creature and give it -3/-3.
Yes. So the next ability is Dash. Dash, it's an alternative casting cost. You may cast a spell for its dash cost. It's in the format dash and then a cost. So you may cast it for that cost. If you do, it gains haste, and it's returned from the battlefield to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step.
So it adds haste to the card and then sets up the delayed trigger to return it to your hand.
Yep. Not too much going on there.
Pretty self-explanatory. And pretty much everything with Dash, except for the rares and mythics with Dash, have the reminder text on it.
Yes.
Next ability is Formidable. Formidable is a keyword ability that will be it's more of a reminder text than anything. It's referencing if you have creatures with total power 8 or greater, do whatever the card says. All of them have the text written on the card because they differ slightly in how their text is written. So those are pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. And it is an intervening if. We'll get to that more later, but the key thing is just it will check when it would go on the stack if the 8 or greater power is true, and then it will check when it would resolve if the 8 or greater.
And the important thing when we say intervening if, what an intervening if is, because it's important to know, and we'll go over it again later. But what an intervening if is if the condition is met, it goes on the stack. If the condition is not met, it doesn't go on the stack at all. And then because it doesn't go on the stack at all, you can't respond to it because it's not there. It didn't go on the stack. If it does go on the stack and your opponent does something to respond, the intervening if also checks again on resolution to make sure all of it is still true. So
Continuing on. So we have Megamorph. We don't have Morph in Standard, but we have Megamorph, which, you know, the rules for Megamorph is all the same, except that, so Megamorph is an alternate casting cost and then ending a special effect. You may cast this card from your hand face down as a 2/2 creature for 3 mana. You can turn it face up at any time for its Megamorph cost, and when you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Again, like we talked about earlier, turning a card face up doesn't use the stack, so remember that when you are ending your special effect.
Yep. Yeah, and like it doesn't use the stack. Also, the +1/+1 obviously does not use the stack.
True. It just has the +1/+1 counter on it.
Yes.
All right. So next set of abilities, we're going to touch on Magic Origins, which only really gave us two and a half abilities. We're going to talk about double face cards a little bit later, which was the transforming is in this set. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. From this set, really all we get is we get Renown. Renown is a triggered ability. When this creature deals combat damage to a player, if it is not yet renowned, put 2 +1/+1 or put a number of +1/+1 counters on it, and it becomes renowned. Basically, it's a triggered ability that can happen once to make your creature usually bigger.
Yeah, like Monstrous, if you play during Theros, this is a what do you call it?
A one-use. Like Monstrous was a one-use ability. Renown is very similar, except that it's a triggered ability, whereas the Monstrous abilities were activated abilities.
Yeah.
So, the other ability, which I think we see a lot more often from this set, is Spell Mastery. Spell Mastery, it modifies how a spell resolves. It's a self-replacement effect. And what it says is if there are 2 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, do this additional thing, or do this thing instead. It is a keyword ability, so all of the text relevant to your card will be written on your card to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Alrighty.
Next up on our list, we're going to go to Zendikar, and we're going to look at
Yay.
Awaken. So Awaken is an alternative casting cost. It's written as Awaken number. And if you cast this card for its Awaken cost, also put a number of +1/+1 counters on target land you control, and that land becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste. It is still a land. Basically lets you pay extra mana into your spell, and then you get to animate a land with a number of +1/+1 counters on it.
Yeah.
That really covers everything with that
Pretty much.
ability. Next ability is Rally. Rally is a triggered ability that is on a bunch of allies. It is a keyword ability. The relevant text will always be on the card. It just says, when this creature or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, do something to all creatures you control, which is an important difference from the old allies, from the old Zendikar and Worldwake sets. Those cards only did something for your other allies or for themselves. The new Rally cards all do something for all your creatures.
And one thing about Awaken, which should be noted, you do need legal targets for every instance of target on the card. So if you want to cast your Ruinous Path, destroy target creature or planeswalker, for its Awaken cost, you need to have a creature or planeswalker to destroy.
I suppose you also technically need a land
Yes,
to target then as well.
You also need a land to target. This probably shouldn't be a problem if you're casting it for 7, but I don't know your life.
I mean, I guess you can actually awaken your opponent's land if you wanted to. I believe it's just target lands.
You control.
Oh, all right.
Because kill spells on your opponent's land seems too good.
Seems too good, right?
For standard.
For standard. So,
Converge. So, Converge, we talked about this a little bit earlier with our Radiant Flames example, but Converge says it has an X. X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast whatever card it is you're casting. So for Radiant Flames, it has Converge. Radiant Flames deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast Radiant Flame. So it's going to do something, it's going to do something based around a number, and that number is the number of types of mana you spend to cast.
Important thing, since we have colorless mana now as a keyword, as a thing in standard, colorless mana does not have a color. It is colorless. Yep. The only colors of mana are
white, blue, black, red, green.
We didn't get purple.
We did not get purple. Mark Rosewater tried hard. Next ability is Landfall. Landfall is a returning mechanic. Landfall is a keyword ability. All of the text from whatever your Landfall ability will do is on the card, but Landfall is written in the forms of whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, do something. And the something will be written on the card. Pretty self-explanatory.
Ingest. Ingest is a triggered ability that happens upon dealing combat damage. It says whenever this creature deals combat damage specifically to the player, that player exiles the top card of his or her library. So obviously we won't get this from dealing non-combat damage to players. We won't get it from dealing combat damage to creatures. Just combat damage to players. And it's a triggered ability.
Yes. Next up is Devoid. So Devoid is a
characteristic defining ability.
It is a characteristic defining ability, which means it works in all zones, and it just says this card has no color. This is on a lot of the Eldrazi cards from Battle from Zendikar and Oath of the Gatewatch, and it's exactly like I said. It just means that that card has no color. All right. So from Battle, we get to go to Oath. Oath gave us a few new keywords to look at in Standard. The first of which is Cohort. Now, Cohort is a keyword ability. It is written. It's most of them are activated abilities, but it is a keyword ability, which is tap this and tap an untapped ally you control to do something. They'll all be written in that form, and all of their text will be on the card themselves.
Yeah, and yeah, it's always the same cost, different abilities.
Yes.
Support is the next one. So it'll be support and then a number. That just means put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to whatever that number is, target creatures. So like support 2, you get to choose up to 2 target creatures and put a +1/+1 counter on each of them. You can't put multiple +1/+1s on the same creature. They have to be different ones.
And it is an up to, so if you only have one creature, you don't have to support your opponent's creature. You can just choose to support up to that number of creatures.
Yes. No, this one does allow you to target your opponent's creatures. But Surge. So Surge is an alternative casting cost. It only functions if you or a teammate have cast another spell this turn. Generally it's less mana, and sometimes it will have special effects upon paying the Surge cost.
I'd say probably the most relevant Surge card we've seen having some play is Reckless Bushwhacker.
Yes.
It's from 8-Whack, which it has an additional effect if you paid the Surge cost.
Yes. Yeah, that was all from...
That covers us from Oath. All right, we get to go to Innistrad. All right, so since we're back in Innistrad, the first thing we're going to cover is Transforming. Transform is a card action which says flip this to the other face. Very specifically, it doesn't turn it face down. Doesn't flip it because it doesn't refer to flipping. It just you're flipping it. Yeah, sorry. It means change this to its other face. Now, we said we'd go over the Transform Planeswalkers from Origins, which works slightly differently. All 5 of the Transform Planeswalkers from Origins, they say exile this, then return it to the battlefield transformed, which returning to the battlefield transformed means come into the battlefield with the other face up. Pretty much all of the Transform cards from Shadows over Innistrad, they all just stay in play. They are the same object because they stay in play, and they just transform while they're in play.
So yeah, they are the same object. So if someone casts a kill spell or something, you can't just transform it to magic it away. Now this does work for the Planeswalker flips cards because they specifically say exile this and then return it to the battlefield transformed.
Yeah, and because it exiled and came back, it is a new object, but all of the cards from Shadows that are transform cards don't leave the battlefield, therefore they are the same object. So if you have an aura on them, that aura stays on them too when you transform it.
There are a variety of different abilities which can transform it. Some will require you to pay some costs. Some will have specific conditions. Some well, one of the most common is the werewolf condition, which is just if an opponent, if no players cast spells last turn, transform this card at the beginning of the upkeep.
Yeah.
And then on the back side, it has if a single player, casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform it back to the front side.
Yeah. Those are all on the cards, so again, they're all
Yeah.
fairly self-explanatory.
One other thing, if there are multiple transform abilities added to these stack,
Affecting the same permanent.
Yes, affecting the same permanent. They will all try to go the same direction. So if you activate your elusive tormentor 3 times, trying to flip it like 3 times,
all in response to each other, not letting them resolve. You're like transform, transform, transform.
Yeah. It will just go to the backside. It won't flip back again. When the other abilities try to resolve, they'll see, oh, you already flipped. Okay, good. I don't need to do anything.
Which is a change from how it was written originally, and I think it just cleaned up some templating on their part.
Yes.
So I think that covers transforming. Missing anything on transforming? I don't think so.
We do have some double-faced card rules, which did change. Maybe go over them just quickly.
The big one that changed was the converted mana cost. Let's say you're on the backside of a card. You're on the backside of Huntmaster of the Fells, and for years your Ravager of the Fells had no converted mana cost and gets abrupt decayed all day long. Well, with the rules update, when Shadows over Innistrad came out, well, now your double face card, if you were on the back side of it, the back face of it, you know that your converted mana cost is whatever it said on the front side of it. So now that you know you have a 4 mana converted mana cost, abrupt decay no longer gets to kill Huntmaster or Ravager of the Fells.
And the other change was what I already talked about. It doesn't want to flippy floppy. It's not gonna.
Literally, what we're looking at as the technical term for that.
No flippy floppy.
No flippy floppy.
Thank you, Wizards of the Coast, for that technical documentation. But yeah, the if you activate it multiple times, it's only gonna flip once.
All right, so that was transforming. Checked we all right. As much as I know, we're trying to kind of go through this to get it all in. Let's take a minute. Do we have any questions sitting waiting for us? No questions there. All right, continuing on then with Delirium. So Delirium is a keyword ability, and it'll be what it'll reference is it's looking to see if there are 4 or more different card types among cards in your graveyard. And if you have 4 or more, it will usually give you either some kind of static ability, or it'll grant you access to an activated ability. The card we're looking at right now is Reaper of Flight Moonsilver, which says whose Delirium ability is sacrifice another creature. This gets +2/+1 until end of turn, but you can only activate it if you have Delirium, which is 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. Being a keyword ability, all of the relevant text for that ability will be on the card itself, so you'll always know what it's referencing.
Yes. Investigate. So investigate means put a colorless clue artifact token onto the battlefield with pay 2, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. So when you investigate, you just put out a nice fancy clue token, and you can sacrifice that token. It has the text of pay 2, sack it, draw a card. Real straightforward.
Mm-hmm. There are a couple of cards that involve keeping track of sacrificing clues, but those are very specific to those cards, so we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Flip your list again. That one, yes. Okay, so that was investigate. So madness. All right, madness. Madness does a few things. There's a few changes for madness from where it was the first time around. So madness is a replacement effect and an alternative casting cost, and used to be a delayed trigger. I love madness. All right, so So Madness says if you would discard this card, you replace that and discard it into exile instead. Under the old rules for Madness, it was your choice. You didn't have to. When they brought it back for Shadows, you are required to discard it into exile. You no longer get that choice. When you do, this is where it's the triggered part. When you do exile it, you may cast it for its Madness cost or put it into your graveyard. So it's still going to get to your graveyard if you decide not to cast it, but it does technically go to the exile zone for a brief moment.
Yep. So you, if you would discard it, you put it into exile. Then we have a triggered ability that'll go on the stack. When it resolves, you will either choose to cast it and put it onto the stack, or you'll put it into your graveyard.
So it's a replacement effect, and it can be stifled, and it can be counterspelled.
Yes.
All of the things.
Yep.
But once you get by all that, that's it.
Yeah. Skulk. So Skulk is just an evasion ability. This creature can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. Real cool ability, not complicated.
Pretty much. All right. And finally, we're on our Eldritch Moon mechanics. So Eldritch Moon gave us 3 new ones that we're going to talk about here. The first one is Meld. So when you meld a creature, it's very similar to the Origins Planeswalkers. The meld ability will be on one of the 2 creatures, and it'll say if you both own and control this card and a card named something else. So the one I'm looking at here is the Hanweir Battlements and the Hanweir Garrison. So we'll use those. If you both own and control this Hanweir Battlements and a creature named Hanweir Garrison, you exile them, then meld them into Hanweir the Writhing Township, which meld means put it back into play from exiled, on the back side, meld it into one creature.
Yeah, and the art on the back of them is real obvious.
Yep, it'll be you'll look at the back side of it, and it's half a card.
Yeah, half of a gigantic card.
Yes.
I had so much fun with this over the weekend.
Yes, you did.
Got to make Brazella a couple of times, but
the important thing with meld to remember is once you have melded your creature, it is one creature. So if there is a kill spell that kills it, both halves go to the appropriate zone. If it's returned to your hand, both halves are returned to your hand.
If it's exiled, then returned to the battlefield. Both halves are returned to the battlefield separately.
On the front side.
Yes.
Although in the case of our Brazella, you go to combat or end step?
End step.
Oh, you go to the end step with Brazella, and then now you meld your Brazella again, because that's how that works.
Yes.
Because that is what her text says. All right, next ability from this set is Emerge. So Emerge is an alternative casting cost. You may cast this spell for its Emerge cost by sacrificing you may cast the spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the Emerge cost, reduced by that creature's converted mana cost. The card from this group, which has seen the most play so far, is Elder Deep Fiend. I have already seen it seeing some play in Modern. That's where that card is at. So you don't get to change the normal rules for when you get to play it, but you get a discount. Usually the Emerge cost has a discount in and of itself, and you get to reduce it by the
converted mana cost of the creature you sacrifice.
Yes, the converted mana cost, not the actual mana cost. So you do not get to reduce the colored component of that. Very, very important to that. Even though let's for our Elder Deep Fiend example, I believe his Emerge cost is blue and 6 for a total of 7 mana. You have to pay the blue at least. Even if you even if you have a creature that costs blue and 6 that you sacrifice to it, you're only reducing by the converted mana cost, not the total mana, not the actual mana cost. You still have to pay blue.
Yeah.
I think that covers Emerge.
And it goes again. This does not change the timing for the spell.
Yes.
If
Elder Deep Fiend happens to have flash on its own, but most of them do not have flash,
yes.
So you can still only cast them on your turn with an empty stack.
Got a few confused people asking me about that, but does not change timing. All right, Escalate. This is our final new ability from Eldritch Moon. So Escalate allows you to pay this cost. So all Escalate cards will have multiple modes. So different options you have when casting a spell. It says choose one or both or multiple, as the case may be.
So escalate is an additional cost to cast the spell. So if for some reason you're casting this spell for free, like let's say we're looking at Borrowed Malevolence, which is a 1-cost instant. Let's say this is on an Isochron Scepter. When you cast it off your Isochron Scepter, you are allowed, because you're casting the spell, you are allowed to pay the additional costs of escalate and add the additional mode to it. And for any of the escalate cards that have, there's several of them that have 3 modes. You can pay the escalate cost multiple times, and each time you add an additional mode. Now, you can't add additional copies of the same mode, but you can keep paying escalates until you have added all of the modes on the card.
And did we read the text for escalate? Well, escalate is pay this cost for each mode chosen beyond the first. So like on Borrowed Malevolence, it costs 1 black. That gets you 1 mode. Then you can pay 2 colorless for each mode beyond the first.
And I did forget that part.
Some of them don't have mana cost there. One of them at least has tap and untap creature you control for the escalate cost. So you'd pay the mana cost of the spell and then tap untapped creatures for each mode beyond the first that you would like to choose. So yeah, that covers our standard keyword abilities. Are there any questions about anything we've gone over today?
All right, we'll give it a couple of minutes. For anybody seeing this for the first time that hasn't seen any of the other videos, we will recommend that if you are interested in judging, there is a website called apps.magicjudges.com. You can sign up there for an account on there. It is where there are a lot of good judge resources on that site, as well as that is also where judges typically go to look for judges for events. And each region will have different things based on that. So, let's see. Anything else that you want to get out there for this week? Because if you want to know more about Judge Apps, we spent, I'd say, a good like 15-20 minutes talking about it in the week 2 video from last week. So if you want to see a lot more about that, I would recommend checking out that video. And I don't see any questions. If you do have any questions, where these videos are located at is the Rochester Judge page. We both check that regularly. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to post something on there, and we can definitely answer those questions from there.
Yeah, that's, if you're watching this, you've probably come here from there, but facebook.com/Rochester Judge Class, or you can just search for Rochester Judge Class. But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up our class for this week. Oh, and we will actually have the practice test up on Friday this week. The past couple of weeks, it's been a little bit behind.
First week wasn't too bad. It was Saturday, but this week, we're not going to lie, it was yesterday.
Like 9.
Mistakes were made. We apologize.
Yes.
Welcome to beta, everybody. I'm going to keep saying it because it's true. All right, I'm going to let you sign us off then.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming to our class. Again, I'm John Aratunji. This is Stacy Winshaw. And this was week 3. We look forward to seeing you week 4 every Monday, 6:30 to 7:30. Well, and beyond the following weeks. Yeah. All right. See you then.